starting with just what for me is a really kind of intriguing contrast in thinking about really both your first and feature and Far North are very, very expansive in their use of landscape. They're very minimal in their use of dialogue, and we're going from that into a film that is driven by dialogue and very, very tense and closed in its use of space. So I'm kind of interested in what informed your choice of this film, I suppose, and your love for it.
Yeah, for me, Do the Right Thing came about when I was about 17 or 18 years old. I was at college. I had an interest in movies and cinema. I was working, probably as a runner at the time, I think, on films. But it was just a film that came along, and the content and the style and the political elements of it, the humour, the music, all of these different elements somehow spoke to somebody grown up in Hackney at the time, coming. And it was one of those films that everybody at school, college around that time, went to see and looked forward to seeing. And I think it was probably the first film that I saw at the cinema more than once, paid to see a film more than once. Before that, in a weird way, it was a coming-of-age movie. Before that, I had used to go to the cinema with my mates, and we'd go and see some Eddie Murphy movie or Police Academy, or, you go with whatever your friends wanted to see, and you could never agree, so you'd see something, and it was crap. And they were fine with that. And I was at this point saying, but I don't want to do this anymore. I'm bothered about what I pay to see, and I want to not talk through movies. I want to actually watch the movie. And so it was around the time when I started going to see films on my own or with friends that took films seriously. So around that time, I remember, Public Enemy's second album was a really big deal. It Takes a Nation of Millions. And there was just lots of elements of the politics, but also the humour, which, the fact that it had a serious side to the film, but there were scenes about stepping on someone's trainers. Now, that was the kind of stuff when you're growing up in that area, which happened, that was all important. So it made me want to make movies because I thought, in a weird way, it spoke to me. It doesn't mean that that's the kind of film I was going to copy. But my first screenplay, which was never made, was set in Hackney and was a series of stories and characters, very personal, all kind of interweaving and crossing over, which was quite directly inspired by this. I just couldn't get it financed. And so while I was waiting for people to read that and get back to me, with my tutor from film school, I went off and wrote something else that was totally unmakeable, which ended up becoming A Warrior. And then I went off on that journey. But, if the first screenplay had been picked up, who knows what I would be doing.
Samuel L. Jackson plays this, fabulous DJ who you sort of meet very early on in the film. And one of his first lines is, the colour of the day is black. And that this just sets that scene, very much where you are. You know what the politic of the film is. You are right there and right in it. And I kind of really, it's an interesting film to revisit, which, is one of the things I love about this series, is that it makes me go back to films from, that I haven't seen in the case of this one since it first came out. And it really seems to be anchored to a very sort of historical moment in a way.
Yeah, it's funny because it was a particular time when the kind of music that was out there and black culture was very big, the whole knowing where you're from thing. And what was interesting, coming from an Indian Muslim background, I remember at that time I'd never been to India. So I remember being with a group of friends who were really into black culture and black music and knew very little about one's own Indian culture. And this film was, in a weird way, opened a few kind of questions, asked a few questions of myself, saying, I've read Malcolm X, I've read about Martin Luther King, I read about all these Black Panthers and things, and yet I didn't know anything about my Indian background. And so one of the things the film did do was to make me write a short film about a character just like that, who seems to be following fashion in a way and following certain things, but actually, realistically, not knowing anything about themselves and where they had come from. And I think there was a particular movement around that time, and I think the film was very much coming from there. But what I like about it is you mentioned something about casting. The casting is amazing. The number of people that are in there, the music, the look. It was just it was a fun movie. It was the kind of movie that I would watch with my friends every other weekend. Watch it again and again because it's very quotable, great dialogue, and so it mixes in politics but in a very accessible way. but it's not neat. It's quite, complex. And I haven't seen it for 15 years probably. I haven't seen it for a while. I've got the DVD, but I haven't watched it. So I thought I'd rather watch it on a big screen with an audience than watch it before we talk. So that's going to be interesting to see how it's changed and how I've changed in the last 20 years.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because in many ways you're seeing a series of tableaus and they play out with these characters. You get this fantastic kind of feel for who you're with and where you are. And just as you're starting to sort of lock into what is actually quite a still shot and, very sort of perfectly framed, there's this sudden camera movement that just takes you out of it and takes you somewhere else, quite completely. And this sort of builds that amazing energy and tension that just kind of keeps you, because it is all of those things. It's funny and it's witty and it's also
technically really strong. I mean, you mentioned, Ernest Dickerson's photography is amazing, the production design, the editing. So, and one of the things I was doing at the time, because I was interested in making movies, was reading up, on different filmmakers. And Spike Lee's books are always quite fun. His diaries, when he made She's Gotta Have It, when he made School Days, and particularly the Do the Right Thing diary, they were really good. And one thing he always said was about trying to create, he wanted to create a community of black filmmakers that were going to rise up and do their thing. And he stuck with his crew. And so you had a team of people that he worked with again and again and again. And Ernest Dickerson, for me, Spike's films changed when he stopped working with Ernest. Ernest went off to make his own movies. And there was something about the collaboration. And I've always wondered, how much can you direct if you're in the film so much of the time? I don't even know how that still works. But I think the photography and the style, and as I became more knowledgeable about filmmaking, I realized all of the reference that are in there, to Night of the Hunter, to various other movies, the camera style. So you've got a film school person as well, you're a film brat in a way, who knows what he's doing. At certain points, he's dipping into other movies and quoting other movies. So that was always quite fun because there were lots of layers within it. Yeah, and I just think he put it together. For me, it's still my favourite film of his, and he just hit something. And he made a lot of noise. The film made a lot of noise when it came out in Cannes. He always made a lot of noise, Spike, and that was interesting. His whole thing of by any means necessary, taking Malcolm X's quote, but that's how films he felt needed to be made. And that's what I took away from it. It wasn't literally trying to make films like his, or like this, but the idea of whatever you do, try and keep your crew, and you've got to get your film made. Whatever it takes, get your film made. No excuses. And that's what I found inspirational about him. Was he was this little skinny guy, but he was like, I'm going to do this. And he also said, it was quite common at the time for black filmmakers or minority filmmakers make 1 film, 2 films, and vanish. And he said, you've got to keep doing it. You've got to, make a film every year, every 16 or 18 months or so, and just be prolific. His inspiration was Scorsese, who taught him at film school. And I was very much, at that time, indie New York cinema was really where it was at, it felt like. And he was another NYU graduate, like Jim Jarmusch. Ang Lee came from there, Scorsese came from there. Another kind of new indie guy, Hal Hartley, I was a big fan of. So there was this movement that came out at that time that he was a part of, it felt like. Which to me and a lot of my friends who now work in films or in TV, there was something quite inspirational about just do it.